Amazing. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. If you see the screen and that title looks like what you were expecting, then you are in the right place. So thrilled to have everyone here today and to talk about care and care about caring. Really exciting times. Just a quick heads up before I dive into things. There are points where I'll pause and ask a question. You are not expected to unmute or go on camera or anything like that. If you want to answer in the chat, I mean, if you are feeling super into it and want to unmute, I will not stop you. That is also excellent. Or you don't have to respond at all. However you'd like to show up today is totally fine with me. And that goes for putting comments in the chat throughout if there's something that you want to share or that you want to reflect on. Feel free to use this space in whatever way makes most sense, honestly, for you to be in this presentation. Also, apologies in advance if you hear any dogs in the background. They have chosen now to play with each other because they know I'm speaking. But anyway, enough about logistics. My name is Melissa DeWitt. I am an instructional designer at the College of Professional Studies at University of Denver. We were mere days ago the University College. So if that name is new to you, it is new to me too. I'll mess it up 30 times. As part of this, in addition to being an instructional designer, I am also an adjunct in our instructional design and technology program at the college. My context, so you know where I'm coming from, is that most classes that I work on and that I teach are online and asynchronous, though sometimes there are synchronous components, but very primarily heavily online. Students are working professionals, usually returning to school to finish a bachelor's degree, but primarily programs are focused on master's degrees. What that means for my average age group that I work with, students are on average in their 30s. Though I have previously taught traditionally aged undergrads in writing, and I was also a research and instruction librarian previously. All of that to say, I've worked with lots of students across a lot of different areas and modalities. So that is what is informing this presentation as well. So just a quick overview of the major topics we're going to cover today. I'll start by defining what care ethics even is, how it applies to teaching and learning more broadly. We'll narrow into the online learning space, and then talk about strategies and practices for online learning using care ethics, and then time for questions. And because I'm an instructional designer, here's an outcome. We're going to identify strategies and practices for online design and teaching that foster relationship building and humanize the online learning environment. Huzzah. Okay. Let's start with some quick definitions of what an ethic of care is in general. Kind of a text-heavy slide, but I'll dive into it. Care ethics stems out of moral philosophy. So care ethics in general is about relationships and well-being. At its core, you can think about it as caring for things or as caring for others within a larger network of social relationships. So in philosophy, care ethics views morality as a thing of ongoing care and responsiveness rather than a set of rules. There's typically two roles when we're talking about care ethics. One is the carer and the other is the cared for. The carer listens attentively and responds to the cared for's needs. This is a relationship that does require responsiveness and reciprocity. If the carer reaches out or initiates an interaction, the cared for does need to respond for it to be a true relationship. If it's one-sided, it doesn't fall under what philosophers consider the caring relationship. So in view of this, caring behaviors and attitudes cannot be identified as like one single agent out of context, but are rather reciprocal and responsive. So really key takeaway, key words here are relationship, reciprocal. Why should we care about caring? So beyond it just being nice to be cared for, I think, a lot of this is going to stem from Nell Nodding's work in the 80s, and then again when applied to education spaces. Noddings argues that every human life starts in relation, and it's through relations that a human individual emerges. So essentially, care is essential for ethical decision making, for human existence, and for the formation of our identities. And also, we all want to be cared for and seen as human beings to thrive, and figure out who we are through our relationships. The idea of ethical caring also goes beyond just I want to I must. So when we're thinking about care ethics, it is sort of an innate thing that is within humans to care, a need. And this is where I pause and ask for very brief participation, if you are so inclined. I want to put some of what we're talking about later in this presentation in context of your own experiences. So this question, if you want to answer in the chat, brief response, however you want to, an emoji, vibes, whatever. How do you know you're being cared for? You might think about like what actions or behaviors make you feel cared for. And also, how does being cared for make you feel? You can think about this in general, or if you want to narrow it into educational spaces, please feel free to go ahead and put some answers in the chat. And I'll pause for just a minute for typing and thinking. Ooh, some good stuff already coming in. We have unexpected kindness. So knowing someone is thinking of you. Messages, gifts, other actions, being acknowledged, right? I think that goes along the lines of knowing people are thinking about you, but also listened to. That is a huge one that'll come up more than once. We have when someone checks back in about something I mentioned, so they've remembered you, they know who you are, being supported. Ooh, whether someone understood you based on their words and actions. So being seen for like who you are and what you've said. These are great. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pause for just 1 second to allow time in case any other thoughts are coming in. Okay, these are great. Thank you for responding. Right, we have a lot of really good stuff in there. I was gonna just add to that too of when I think of being cared for, I think of it making me feel like safe, that I'm in a trusting environment, that I'm more likely to be who I am and be more of myself when I feel cared for, and that I know the other person genuinely cares about who I am. It also, I think, helps me relate and care for others, including for their opinions, even if they differ from my own. So those are some of the feelings that kind of arise for me too. And a lot of the stuff that you said as well is really great. We're going to take some of these feelings and ideas then into the teaching and learning context. So keep these things in mind, review through the chat, because this is what it's going to look like from an educational perspective. So again, we're going to return back to Nell Nodding's application to education, starting in the 80s, but then has been ongoing since then. We have the same idea of the carer and the cared for. In this instance, it's going to be applied to instructors as carers and students as the cared for. The instructor is interested in the expressed needs of students and puts those above the needs of the school or the institution. So really primarily centering students in this. Noddings was also critical of education that primarily emphasized academic achievement, accountability, and measurable goals over like actual people. She believed that education should be about caring and specifically helping others practice care for themselves, others, animals, the environment, objects, and ideas. So care encompassing a lot of things. This all culminates in the idea of valuing students as whole people and not like little educational robots. If anyone is from a Jesuit school or has that background, there's a concept called cura personalis, or care for the whole person, which is a key value. And with that, it's about education, not about, or should be about developing the whole person and not just their educational context. So when the care perspective is applied to education, what we're thinking about is the goal of helping students find their full potential by addressing their individual needs, as them holistically. So in this way, when we're thinking about things like inclusive learning environments, that means recognizing individual identities, backgrounds, and needs. And also think about those emotions or behaviors or actions we just identified in the chat when feeling cared for, and think about how that translates to education, right? If I have trust in my instructor and I'm caring for my classmates, that might promote a space where there's more open dialogue, there's deeper connection to my class. I feel like we're all trying to be in this together rather than these individual goals or trying to be people in silos. And then to expand on the care perspective in education, in 1984, Noddings proposed elements of care teaching from a care perspective that consists of 4 elements. And these are going to be pretty big for the rest of the presentation. We have modeling, which is an instructor's genuine demonstration of caring behavior that they expect from their students. So things like honesty, promptness, trustworthiness. The next is dialogue, which is a back and forth conversation with learners with no judgment in an attempt to build relationships, develop norms, reach shared understandings, and invite deeper connections. After that is practice, which is opportunities for students to practice the act of caring with an explicit focus on the act of helping and supporting peers. So that could be collaborative and cooperative learning activities. And then finally, confirmation, the act of supporting the development of a better self by encouraging and affirming the best in others. Which then takes us into the online space. So far, all of that was talking about what caring looks like just in education in general. However, researchers Alfrey and Robinson talk about in their study the challenge of ethical care in online learning. So they say enacting ethical care is complex and more demanding in an online learning classroom, as it involves not only care for students, but also care for the course and its technological artifacts, highlighting the demanding nature of online teaching and the challenges online learning environments present on the formation of caring relations and encounters in online learning environments. So I wanted to start by talking about some of those challenges that are identified, and I'll start with you too. In your experience, whether that is teaching or even as a student or things that you just think would be challenging, what do you think is most challenging or difficult about teaching online, or perhaps about being a student online? Okay, we have the first one coming on disconnect. The connection part, right? Building community, feeling disconnected, so more disconnect from others in class. Connections, trust, right? Distance in environment, right? We're not next to each other. Yeah, from the teaching perspective, you can't just immediately see and react and respond to things that are happening, right? It's not a quick one-to-one like that. Um, Putting stuff into a void, absolutely, where they don't respond, because then it makes me feel sad. I'm like, wait, I reached out. Yes, these are all great, and you can continue putting these in the chat. I'm gonna go into some of the ones that are just identified in a lot of the caring online space literature. All of these absolutely. Anything you think of is true with online learning. There's a lot of challenges. So already mentioned physical proximity. You're not near people. Tying into social presence being defined as the degree to which a person is perceived as a real person in mediated communication. It's really hard to relate to people and build relationships if you just don't think they're real or they're just a name on a screen. It can be hard to seem authentic, especially when it comes to care. Multiple components need together, but just taking one action and being like, oh, that's all the caring I'm going to do today, it can feel like worse online for whatever reason, or people can read into it. It's just a lot harder when you don't have those verbal and nonverbal like cues that are coming. Other things like online introductions could feel formulaic, tedious, or inauthentic. If it's kind of over and over and they're like, oh God, this again. Though in a lot of research studies, students did consider introductions a form of caring. Things like sharing stories or checking in might seem like enough to build connection, but it's still really, really hard to kind of do authentically online. So one theme that's going to come up in some of the next sections is the idea of being prepared to teach as well as a form of caring. After the pandemic, especially, a lot of people continue to stay online or shift to making more online classes. Whether that's from a genuine desire to reach out and teach in different modalities, or if maybe it was your university's way to get the enrollment cliff and try and mitigate the budget. I don't know, whatever it is. There's lots of reasons that happen. But teaching online is different than in person. And someone being unprepared to teach online can be an issue for the online space and for students in the classroom. And then lastly, technology might seem like the answer to some of these problems, but tech itself could be an issue in the online space. Alfred and Robinson in particular warn that integration of technology into the learning and teaching process is only as effective as the pedagogical choices and principles underpinning its use. So we'll keep those in mind. And all of that just meaning that the argument is that a mere switch of the mode of delivery from face-to-face online without adjusting and customizing existing educational content and techniques to the learner's needs and situation is not sufficient. And in fact, researchers argue that goes against principles of care. So being intentional about the switch in modalities is a big deal. And so we have to be intentional about design of the course, the implementation, the environment, and the practices. So if we assume that what we know about care-centered practices for face-to-face apply exactly to online learning, then we're missing a lot of elements that make for a caring environment. So instead, we need to understand that there are different needs online, that intentional technology can support efforts, and we can think about caring relation in different ways when we're in an online format or virtual, whatever we want to call it. And this is where I want to bring in some of those humanizing pedagogy elements. So one way to address some of those challenges mentioned is to humanize the online space while also applying an ethic of care. Michelle Picanti-Brock, in response to the challenges to relate to students or see them as names on screens, talks about a need to humanize the online classroom. So she states, in humanized online courses, positive instructor-student relationships are prioritized and serve as the connective tissue between students' engagement and rigor. Human connection is the key to students performing to their full potential. And she states in humanizing online spaces that there are sort of 4 principles that are woven together throughout that you can see with this visual. The first being trust that's sort of woven throughout, where as an instructor, it's your responsibility to intentionally cultivate student trust. And one way of doing that is selective vulnerability in the online community you build with your learners. So sharing aspects of your life, things like that. We'll get more into that in a second. Beyond trust, we have presence. Involves intentional efforts to construct your authentic self through brief, imperfect videos to ensure your students know you're in this journey with them. We have awareness as well, achieved by learning about who your students are and how you can support them. And then empathy requires you to slow down, see things through your students' eyes without judgment, be flexible, and support them towards their goals. So what's going to happen in this next section is I'm going to talk about ways to address a lot of those challenges that we talked about with the online space, specifically through a care-centered approach. And then the humanizing elements, you're going to see woven throughout some of these care approaches, where I'll call out and be like, this is where this comes in from that humanizing learning perspective and how it fits over those 4 elements of care. So I'll read this quote very briefly. A climate of care in an online learning space with its focus on community building, relationships, and learners' expressed needs versus assumed needs of the instructor, school, or educational system through active and mutual listening. Came from the chat. Y'all nailed it. School or educational system. So through active and mutual listening, dialogue, trust, and openness without judgment can support the development of safe and inclusive spaces that enhance the potential for critical pedagogical practices and aims to emerge and grow. So this is our vision. This is what we're hoping to do as we get into some of these strategies and practices. So how do we do this? Weaving care honestly throughout an online class is critical. So just having like a nice tone on occasion isn't quite enough. As a framework to think about care in online spaces, this is where we're going to return to Notting's 4 areas of care that she identified and I talked about earlier. So care ethics focuses on experience of caring as the medium through which we care to learn. A teacher models caring relations, confirms another's best intentions, and creates opportunities for dialogue into practice caring. The chart that you're seeing on screen here was pulled from, I keep mentioning Alfred and Robinson. They have like a lot of, they're like the people right now in the online care space. So that's why those names keep coming up. But in a 2024 study of theirs, to date, there had not been a ton of research in the online space. But what they did was they synthesized the work that researchers had done and they identified key themes for each element that Noddings had provided. So I do want to preface by saying that some of these themes that you're going to see are fluid. Researchers have put them under multiple areas. So this is by no means like the set way of doing things. I'm using this specific example because it's recent, and it's coming from folks who do a lot of research in this space and pulled all of it together. So this is how I'm going to break down this next section in strategies and examples. So additionally, in this section, I'll weave in some of those principles and elements of humanized learning so you can see how they fit into these areas of care as well. I'm going to pause for my dry mouth. Okay, we start with modeling. We defined modeling earlier as instructors' genuine demonstration of caring behavior that they expect of their students, so like honesty and promptness. One way this can be done is through instructor presence, which also directly relates back to our humanized online teaching, where presence was one of those principles as well. So presence being like the thing. One way that this can be done is just through presence. It involves active participation from the instructor. So this includes things like sending reminder emails, making an effort to show up in the discussion board, touching base with learners, being accessible during times students might need guidance, getting student feedback through polls, creating videos, essentially strategies so students feel like the instructor is there and present in their space. And also, side note, Stacey, I'm glad it was a fake tornado and not a real tornado. That's like one of my fears. I mean, in Denver, I'm not going to get a tornado, but like, I don't know. What if it just comes for me? So anyway, I'm glad you're safe. Back to instructor presence. In my own teaching, here ways that I try and practice this behavior so students know I'm real and present are in a couple different ways. One goes back to that idea of imperfect videos. I make all of my videos on a regular basis and I don't reuse them, which I don't know, I'm probably making a lot of work for myself, but I make videos every time I teach my class so that I can reference things that are happening in the class in real time. I can use student names in that classroom and bring them into the video and make them feel like I'm there in the space with them and I know who they are and I'm acknowledging them in the stuff that I'm producing. Right, like in the humanized learning elements, this can be a bumper video, which is a short 2 to 3 minute clip to help students understand like a sticky concept, or a micro lecture where I can guide students through concept or complex concepts in the materials. If we think back to those challenges that were identified and social presence being a big one, what I'm trying to do with the instructor presence aspect is just make them see I'm real and that I have layers and I'm so nuanced, right? And one of those things being I value authenticity and open communication. And so my videos are like this presentation. I make mistakes, I go on tangents. Right, like I'll keep in flubs, things like that. That's really authentic to how we would communicate anyway. And again, that goes back to it's an element identified in humanizing online classrooms are those imperfect videos. And a lot of this, when we're thinking about our online spaces, is there just are not opportunities to run into one another to get experience as a person on like the fringes of classroom time where you might come early and just like talk with each other or stay after and ask questions. You have to intentionally insert yourself as a human being person. Videos being one way. I think discussions being another place where I sometimes let discussions go a little off topic, even in an asynchronous discussion board, or try and ask questions about who they are as people. Just so some of that stuff that is missing or becomes sort of, I don't know, almost more sterilized in the online space is inserted back in. Humans are messy, and so are the videos. They're not like bad, but it's authentic. This all leads honestly into intentional course design. So anticipating learners' needs and questions and addressing those through course design is a strategy to show care. Some strategies suggested by participants in a 2020 study included placing resources in an accessible and visible location on the course site, and the use of frequently asked questions and rubrics to minimize questions. Essentially making a space that's easy to navigate for students. Thinking about things like cognitive load and getting overwhelmed by navigating a new space or environment that may not be something they're used to, because Canvas isn't a natural place to do stuff. In humanized learning, not everyone's using Canvas, but you know what I mean. In humanized learning, the humanized homepage that ensures students are introduced with a clear, friendly homepage that tells students how to proceed and where to start is an example of intentional course design. So making sure, right, like here's where you introduce, this says start here, I go through this. A lot of our courses in our design and in teaching, they do have a homepage, right, where it helps them navigate to different resources, both in the course and then across campus. And then also every week has a very similar format. Links to materials are really present and easy to find. Everything is kind of set out so that you're intentionally thinking about like, okay, how is a person moving through this space? And how are they getting to resources? And showing care for their experience in navigating, right, the same as if navigating through a building and not knowing where to go, signposting those things in the online space as well. So this is an interesting element that is under modeling. Uh, Synchronous interaction addresses challenges around distance, connectedness, and presence, so it makes a lot of sense. Some researchers have suggested that this is a necessary component of caring in the online space. My controversial take is I think it's nice to have, but I still think caring and connectedness and presence can be done without it. It's maybe because I grew up as a child of the internet, where I was on Live Journal and had pen pals and was like talking to people I never met and never talked to synchronously. See, that's my bias that I'll be showing there. But just know that meeting virtually can be a helpful care component and make you seem more real, right? Like you're seeing me live and in person doing my thing. And if this were a classroom, we could be interacting and things like that. So totally makes sense under the aspect of modeling. I also just think that if this is something you can't quite have, it isn't a deal breaker for care. Hot take. Anyway, um, the next we have is student-centered teaching practices. Some of the stuff that was already mentioned kind of rolls into this. So this approach involves recognizing various and intersecting identities, decentralizing the instructor, and prioritizing students, their experiences and expertise as well. That's like the thesis statement for humanized learning. So thinking about how do you bring in student experiences or things that they care about into the classroom. So this could be through discussions or assignments. One thing that we have and that I take very seriously is a student survey at the beginning of the class. That's also one of the 8 elements of humanized learning that is suggested. You get a good snapshot of individualized needs. Only I see it, and I tell them how I'm going to use it and respond to them on what they shared. And you get everything from like, here's how you pronounce my name to, oh, I have ADHD. It's not a big deal. I don't have accommodations for it, but like sometimes I'm just off topic. Or, hey, I might need some extensions on assignments because I deal with chronic fatigue. XYZ. It doesn't ask them to disclose anything. The question's pretty broad, but students do share different information in there. And actually a lot of times in that space there's a lot of like, thank you so much for asking this, I really appreciate that you like care about who I am, to know this information. So that's personally my favorite. I learn a ton about students that again I'm not going to just get. I also try and practice modeling in student-centered practices through a teaching philosophy statement, which is going to roll into our last aspect of flexibility as well. So with flexibility, one thing I do is I tell students about my approach, my goals for the online classroom space, which are to have transparency, communication, and community building. I also share connected to my philosophy my late policies, which are flexible because they connect back to my philosophy. I try and come in with an understanding that online students, especially in my classes, are working full time. A lot of them have families or other people they're caring for. And that typically when students choose to go into online learning, a lot of times they've done that for various reasons that have to do with flexibility, making online learning more appealing. So to me, that makes it really important to recognize that people have lives and needs and things outside of this space because we're not meeting at a set time. And centering students as the whole person so they can succeed online. So to bring all of that together, this is an example of my teaching page. It goes a little fast, but I'll repeat. It's pretty similar to the idea of a liquid syllabus, another one of those 8 elements of humanized learning. Uh, on my page, there's a welcome video that's pretty authentically me. I redo it every time, just to introduce what's going on. What am I currently into? That sort of thing. You'll see right there a Padlet that has a lot of pictures from various aspects of my life so they can see just different things about me. And then all of that text that you're seeing is what to expect from me, and then also what I expect from them. My teaching philosophies on this page, as well as my contact information. I'm trying to create a space where they feel welcome, have a clear idea of what we're going to do and what they can expect in this class. And my policies are also flexible because they're tied to my philosophy and understanding of the students in the class. And also as a person who needs flexibility myself, I try and like give that back in that space too, just kind of based on that as well. So I'm trying in this liquid syllabus or in this welcome page to infuse my instructor presence, to think about design, to try and center students in this, and to incorporate flexibility as well. And now we're on to the next area of care, which is dialogue. This was defined as a back and forth conversation with learners with no judgment in an attempt to build relationships, develop norms, reach shared understandings, and invite deeper conversations. While some have noted that dialogue is the second element of Nodding's model, was more difficult to enact online. These studies have identified certain strategies that, when approached and designed intentionally, can enhance a climate of care and support the formation of an online community of learners. So this first aspect of dialogue is about intentionally creating spaces for dialogue and for multiple different reasons. So this includes individual communication with the instructor and group communication amongst the class. Technology becomes a huge part of dialogue in the online space, because you can do a lot with technology in order to write like email, to have synchronous meetings, to have discussion spaces, to collaborate on perusal, to make Padlets, etc. So you could consider things too, like, is this a space that's private so that students feel safe asking questions, especially if it's really personal, versus is this a discussion board because I want them to be in dialogue with one another and not necessarily with me. So really multifaceted. So intentionally thinking, what are the spaces that are being created for dialogue? What are they for? And also, why are they being used? What tech best facilitates this? The self-affirming icebreaker is another element of humanized learning that fits under this element of care, where students are encouraged to share something about themselves. Can be one aspect of this. Back to that course introduction thing, where students introduce themselves to each other as well. I make sure that there is in design some space for students to introduce each other, whether that is in like a really standard space or within the week themselves, that connects to some of the learning. In a setting where authenticity is a challenge, intentionally creating spaces for dialogue for multiple reasons using appropriate technology can help with that feeling of connectedness and realness. Student feedback, or eliciting student feedback, is another component of dialogue. Student feedback on the course itself can come in the form of something like a mid-course survey, asking them how to do things, or how are they doing? How is their learning? Is there anything that can be improved? I find this really helpful to continue learning who students are, and then reassure them if they're worried about something in the course, or to point them towards resources if they need them. And I didn't know that. So again, intentionally creating a space to get that dialogue. We're not, again, organically running into one another to share these things about ourselves. And so there's some aspects of who we are online that just aren't going to be visible, that maybe students do want me or others to know. So sending an individual email to everyone early in the course, asking if they needed any support and checking in on how they're doing is also another aspect. So I'm constantly reaching out, whether that is built into it or like something that I'm doing as part of my teaching practice. It's another tactic for dialogue and to build relationships. The last one under dialogue is responsiveness, as in responding in a timely manner to questions, not ignoring someone reaching out, not disappearing for 3 weeks, and then being like, oh, yeah, here's your question. It's important that everyone in the relationship, in this relational aspect, feels like they're being heard and responded to, since that is a big aspect of care. So rolling into our next aspect of care, which is practice, and that involves opportunities for students to practice the act of caring with an explicit focus on the act of helping and supporting peers. There's not as much under this section for a reason. Some studies have found that indicators of practice were limited compared to other elements of Notting's model, and identified that being due to an instructor's lack of readiness for online teaching as a possible factor influencing their ability to then foster a climate of care through practice when teaching online. So, what does that mean? It includes instructors' readiness and knowledge with online tools and technology, instructional design for online, and facilitation in the online environment to create a space where care can be practiced. So, if not prepared, that can involve creating really inefficient discussion spaces where students can't really practice that care for one another or really show who they are at all, or being really unprepared to address technological challenges or to navigate people through the space, or things along those lines. Just in general, this is shows the importance of professional development for online instructors and it being a huge need, it especially a fundamental element of care of do you know enough about this online space and how it differs and how it can be facilitated to then be able to practice care essentially. Um, a good way of showing practice or care through practice is through the intentional design for spaces and activities. So that involves providing opportunities for peer-to-peer support, supporting the formation of a learning community through small talk, having storytelling, and enhancing students' sense of care about their own learning and its impact on their wider lives through practically based and interactive learning opportunities. One researcher, Raven, shared that when putting groups together for group work, she included intentional prompts and spaces where students could learn more about each other. She also told them she was doing this and said, hey, these prompts are here intentionally to practice care. And that included prompts such as start by teaching each other one word from your home language, or share an artifact that represents your family, or describe something you care about learning today. So really putting in prompts before getting into the content to learn more about each other. And I would say historically, that's not something that I had done on the instructional design side of putting into discussion prompts, because a lot of times there's a focus on like, they need to learn the stuff and get to the outcomes. And so then that like personal element is missing. I'm experimenting this quarter. And I told students I was like, hey, I'm going to be putting in some prompts for this, tell me how it goes. Here's why I'm doing it. So stay tuned on the outcomes and if that actually works. But one researcher did at least find that a really effective way of showing and practicing care. I do try and include moments where students can check in with one another before discussion, in trying to infuse more of that where we can learn from one another. Other strategies to try and do this, having video responses so they can see and hear one another and get those cues to be reminded of like humanity, that they're a person, and intentionally really building in times for them to like see and know and understand each other because it just won't happen otherwise. And we're now into our last area, which is confirmation. It's the act of supporting the development of a better self by encouraging and affirming the best in others. There's in the actual chart, there's like 5 different ways of doing feedback, and I just feedback. as the general thing, because it is feedback is how confirmation is enacted and how care is approached in this way. It's also an element of that humanized online learning approach, which states that how you deliver feedback really makes a difference. Um, there is an article from researchers, it's Robinson et al. In 2023, called Critical Pedagogy and Care Ethics, Feedback as Care, where they literally just talk about all the ways to give feedback and how that shows care. We want to care about students for the whole people, how to build relationships, and also we want them to grow into people who care about the things around them too. And the best method for doing this in the online space is really just through feedback. One study found that enhancing care through confirmation pointed to the significant role that assessment culture and feedback plays into establishing that caring climate. Dialogic, personal, and purposeful feedback that emphasize learning over grading, as well as the use of alternative assessment strategies, such as self or peer assessment, all contributed to a culture of care online. One suggestion was, and from humanized learning and care researchers, is to deliver feedback over video or through voice note. So students can, again, get that verbal and nonverbal cues about feedback, which minimizes misinterpretation or that thing, right, where we see text and we're like, oh my God, they hate me, or like they thought my work was trash. And you can actually hear, like, no, this is how I would give this to you if I were telling this to you in person. Um, this is also an area where I think it comes up a lot, right? Like how students don't read or maybe care about feedback as like one of the downsides, I think, to like feedback in the online place. And so, right, this is only one element of care. And if a student knows that you care about them and want to be part of that relationship, and that they'll engage in those caring acts, I think like telling them like I'm giving you feedback and I really want you to understand it and I care about your growth make is an opportunity for pause and be like, oh, okay, like this is how this is being used and this is like what's going on with this. I also think there's another element when students aren't reading feedback in the online space. It can be attributed to disinterest, which can be true, but I also think it's just hard to find in the online learning environment. I'm not talking about it in this presentation specifically, but Alfred and Robinson recently proposed a fifth element to Notting's care ethic work that would be specifically for online spaces, and that's the act of anticipating. So, specifically anticipating the needs and support that students need in an online environment in Canvas, at least. Finding feedback is just not intuitive. I don't know if y'all have been on the student side and tried to do it. It's like got several clicks. It can actually be given like 3 or 4 different ways. There's like a lot of different guides on finding it depending on how it's been given. And that means finding it in different ways. I had a class where at the mid-course check-in, students talked about how they didn't even realize I was giving them feedback and where to find it until week 4. So we're a 10-week quarter system. Halfway through the class, they were like, oh, you're giving feedback. And I had been giving lots. And so just through that experience, I realized that I needed to do more to ensure students could even find feedback, that I was giving it, and that I really cared about it and wanting to watch them grow through their work. And so I started sharing resources every time feedback came out on how to find it. So I knew they could do that. And I also started sharing my philosophy behind the feedback I was giving so they'd understand why it was happening. And again, that I did care about their progress. Um, and also, Tyler had added to the chat about that video feedback, a nice way of balancing out more detailed textual feedback with big picture ideas. I love that. I think video feedback can do so many different things that end up getting missing in just like the textual stuff. Whether that is like your ability then to share screens or things like that as well. Okay, we're running out of time, which is great because I am almost done. This is a question broadly for you to chew on. What other strategies show care or humanize the online classroom? If you want to check them in the chat. And I'm going to jump ahead to wrap it up. So there is 5 minutes for questions. And this is just in summary of everything talked about, which is, again, care ethics. It's about relationships, and in education, that includes caring for students as whole people. Care strategies have to be tailored to the online environment. Principles and elements of humanizing online classes can be intentionally woven through areas of care. And preparing to teach in the online environment is like a really crucial component that comes up over and over again. Okay, thank you. Sorry for rushing through the end, and thank you so much for a 5-minute warning. What questions, comments, concerns, snide remarks do people have? Or again, additional stuff that you want to add on, other ways that you think care shows up, things that you're chewing on, would love to hear about those as well. And also, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy when anyone listens to me for even 5 minutes. So, y'all, it's pretty great that you did it for 50. So thank you. And I will stop talking so you can talk too.